talk a little bit about the
So
law.
let's go over some of the laws. I mean, they're pretty basic. There's not a whole lot to understand, but there's a lot that goes with the laws and what are the laws. So let's just kind of talk about kids that and where they get to when they're breaking laws, so to speak. Okay? I mean, it kind of starts out with, why do we have these laws in the first place? Where did they come from? And when did laws start for kids? And laws started when kids were this tall. You know, there were rules. Maybe you had to make your bed when you got up. Maybe you had to, you know, be down at the breakfast table by 8 o'clock. Things like that. Kids are taught rules from a very early age. So it's not something that's new to them as they get to be in middle school or high school. It's just given to them in a different light, is how I like to say it. Okay? Simple, easy. It's just like alcohol. It's illegal to use or possess under the age of 21. Is that cut and dry? No. Because at 18, they can get a medical marijuana card. If they can find a doctor that will sell them one or give them one. So if they have migraines because they played sports and now they have headaches all the time, or they got a bad knee, or I've heard all kinds of things. So kids that are turning 18 are where in their life? Probably seniors in high school for the most part, right? They're still in the high schools. They're still dealing with kids that are younger in the high school and the middle school. So it's not so cut and dry. Go ahead. What? Yeah, let's see what. Okay. I want to keep going on the back one. So for the kids that can get that medical marijuana card at 18, or the kids that are 21, are there kids that can get a medical marijuana card younger than 18? How do you think they go about doing that? What's that?
Their parents.
Exactly. Their parents can say that they have that injury or that whatever it is, the debilitating thing, and sign it, and they can get a medical marijuana card. So kids have access to marijuana at a much younger age than you guys think. And that's one of the things that I really want to drive home with you guys, is that even though the law states you must be 21, kids are finding ways to get around that. How many of you guys got high school kids? How many of you have seniors? How many of you have seen the fake IDs that your seniors have? Yeah, he's an honest parent. The kids, when they are seniors in high school, at the beginning of the year, get a big group together, they go online, and they buy fake IDs. Those fake IDs are guaranteed by the companies over in China and Japan. If you buy those fake IDs and it gets confiscated from you, they guarantee they'll send you 2 more. That's what we're up against. That's what you guys are up against. And that's why when we talk about this stuff and the fake IDs and other things, how many of you guys, and yeah, let's not use a show of hands. How many of you guys have been to a pot shop? Think about this, because it's something you need to do. I would encourage you to go to one. I would say
I'd be willing to take you on a field trip. I bet you Thomas would too. Because it's something that you need to do to educate yourself with what you're up against out there. There are so many different items that the kids are using now, and I know we're going to get to that down the road, but I just get started and I kind of roll. So anyways, how many of you guys know what the legal number is for drinking and driving? 08, right? Okay, and how do they go about proving that?
Breathalyzer or blood test.
Breathalyzer or blood test, okay? So, to get that evidence against somebody that's been drinking, there's a whole standard of tests they call field sobriety tests that you give to a driver you suspect has been drinking alcohol. Well, they want us, as law enforcement, to use those same standards to determine if people have been smoking marijuana. Use those same tests to determine if those people have used marijuana, which stays in your system for 30 days. How are we, as law enforcement officers, going to be able to do that? The state of Colorado hasn't come up with an answer yet. Yet, how long has marijuana been legal? So these are all things that we're trying to freshly determine, yet when we look at all the laws and we see that it's 21 to use marijuana or alcohol, or 18 to get a medical marijuana card, they want driving while impaired to be just as black and white, but it's not. And so that makes it tough for us to do our jobs. So what way we as police officers, do you guys know how we say we determine that somebody is high? What is the way that we're going to prove that? What's the only legal way right now that we can do that? It's a blood draw. It's a blood draw. Can we legally get that blood draw? Yes, sir.
You can't, and it's not good because you got a 30-day gestation of cannabis. So
And
how can you prove that the person just ingested
Exactly.
cannabis?
So I'm just kind of giving you guys a little hint of what we're up against. And it's tough. It's really tough. I think some of the things Colorado did, they didn't think through all the way. They made it legal, yet they make our jobs pretty tough on us.
Or can I just chime in? I do think though that you can tell your kids that it's illegal to drive and it's not safe to drive if you're intoxicated on marijuana.
There's no doubt.
They don't need
There's-
to know all that. You know, it's
They don't.
They don't need to know the difficulties of proving that they are
They don't,
high.
but there's adult, you know, I was just kind of talking to
No,
these guys
no.
as, go ahead.
Wait, no, I have a question.
Okay.
So, could you talk a little bit about, like the consequences if a kid does bring marijuana to school and none of you guys?
Right, but is that?
Yeah, this is done. No, this is done.
It is.
The laws
Okay,
are-
sure I
But yeah,
can.
I'm just asking.
I'm
a
thought,
question.
yeah, that was part of what was coming.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, okay, so what happens to a kid when they get caught with marijuana or what we know to be marijuana use devices? They get what is called an MIP. What is an MIP? Minor in possession. Okay? So what does that constitute for those kids? There's school consequences, and then there's law consequences. School, you're probably going to get 3-day suspension to a 10-day suspension. laws, we're gonna give them a summons, which is a piece of paper. We're gonna call you in as the parents. We're gonna say, hi, Mr. Johnson, I just caught Tommy in the bathroom with a vape pen, and he had a small amount of marijuana. I need you to come down. There's gonna be consequences with the school, and there's gonna be consequences with the courts. And so then you gotta come down to the school, you gotta talk to probably the assistant principal of discipline, and then you're gonna receive a summons for court for your child, usually in about 2 to 3 weeks. And you're gonna go to court, and usually what our court system do on the first ticket is offer a deferred judgment. You're probably not even gonna see the judge that first time that your child gets in trouble with marijuana. They're gonna offer them a deferred judgment, which means they're gonna have to take some classes at U-Zone, some marijuana classes. They're going to probably have to do some community service, and sometimes they have to pay court costs or fines. It also means that the school is going to have some classes that they have to go to. That we have up at Aspen, we have a series of 5 different classes that the kids have to take. One is about the law, one is about community and how are you hurting yourself and others. Another one is the effects of marijuana on the brain or alcohol. So there's different classes that the kids take. But honestly, when you look at it, what is the number one thing that could hurt that child the most when they get in trouble with the school and the law? In my opinion, it's their college application. Because now, on their college application, it used to say, have you ever been convicted of a crime? A lot of them now are saying, have you ever been offered a deferment or had an interaction with law enforcement over alcohol or drugs? So the colleges are catching up on it. So those are some of the consequences that happen just for the very first time that the kids were to get in trouble with any of these things at the schools. Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, and I think it's awesome that you're talking about that. And it's really cool for you guys to know that, because kids really care about the consequences that are going to affect their life. They don't really care about, all these other things that we tell them. So if they actually see something that could really affect them in the immediate future, if you can share that information with them. that
Thomas,
would
you
be
got anything
helpful.
else you want to add to that? Yes,
Does
ma'am.
it go on their adult record? Like if you're.
Well, it depends on their age,
Right,
okay?
under-
If they're under 18, it is not gonna go on their adult record. But you gotta remember, it's not legal till 21. So they can still be charged when they're that 18, 19, and 20-year-old. And a lot of kids do get that up here in this area because what do we have? We got Jazz Aspen, we got X Games, we got all these big events that kids go to. And so yes, it could go on their adult record. A lot of times it doesn't, but it could. Any other? Yes, ma'am.
Do the consequences vary between whether you're underage and you have it in your blood, you're underage and you have a little bit in a vape pen, or you're underage and you have intent to distribute?
Well, you wouldn't have just a little bit with intent to distribute.
Well, but
You'd
a
have
little
to
bit
have
or
quite a bit,
intent,
you
yeah.
know what I
So
mean?
how does that
But
change?
what I'm saying is, where they're gonna get in the most trouble is when we find paraphernalia or marijuana. They're not gonna get in a whole lot of trouble if it's just in their system, because right now, it falls on us to prove that they're high. And there aren't a whole lot of ways to do that. I can say, through my training and experience, I believe that this young man had bloodshot, watery eyes, that he's smelled of marijuana, that he admitted that he was high, but I don't know that you're gonna get a DA to even buy in on that. We basically have to have something. We have to have at least a little bit for us to charge them. And 2 questions.
I was just gonna say, but in that situation, if they're not being charged with driving a vehicle and you're just questioning whether or not they're underage using, then you could do a positive tox. You could do a blood draw.
Right, But
Positive.
we can't force that on a child. So what I'd have to do is I'd have to say,
Parental consent.
yes, or you gotta get the kids' consent too.
Yep.
And this is where you run into the problem.
Under 18?
Yet, you still have to, their consent, because they've gotta put their arm out there. I'm not physically gonna hold them down to put that needle in their arm. So there's a lot of gray areas out there right now. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and you could have religious, intersecting with that,
Sure
like
you can.
Jehovah's Witnesses that are going, hey, my kid's not getting vaccinations, they're not having a
There's
needle
no
in their
doubt,
arm.
there's a lot of that out there, and the kids are pretty sharp when it comes to that, and they realize, and they're gonna tell you, search and seizure, that's an illegal seizure, you can't take my blood, and the kids are pretty smart.
You can
And
also
they,
test it in
and
your-
they talk about it a lot, and the thing that you're up against is social media,
Right.
because they get a lot of their ideas from social media. They're very well versed in what happens with social media. Yes, ma'am?
And it's just because I'm gonna have to run, and part of the reason that I was here this evening is, and of course I appreciate like the punitive consequences, and I'm also here because I think that the kids are smart, and I would like to know, and maybe you guys are gonna be going into it a little bit more detail of actually what happens to the developing brain, and to be able to have a really educated, straightforward conversation with, because sometimes I think that's like, these are the consequences, other than going to jail, or other than it's gonna be bad on your college. Like, what is the physical ramifications? That's,
And that, there's
is
a
that
whole
coming
presentation
up?
on that,
Yeah,
right?
Cordy is gonna talk a little bit about that,
okay.
the health effects.
So
Yeah.
you guys should
And-
put
Being
Brandon
filmed
in,
to their
you know.
decision.
Oh, right, oh, okay,
There's some
Okay.
info in that packet as well
okay,
about the health effects.
yeah.
Okay, so anybody have any other questions about the law?
To answer her question, that if marijuana is brought to school and distributed, that's totally different than just being under the influence. If it comes here on school and it gets distributed, that's a felony, which is something totally different.
Yes.
I have a question about the edibles.
Okay.
Are you gonna go into that later, or?
Is that's on there for sure, right? The edibles and the DAP and the wax, and yes, we are.
Yeah, whether.
There's all kinds of different things, and we're gonna try and touch on that, as quick as we can.
Yeah.
But, that's why when I said, who's been to a pot shop, and I encourage you to go, that's where you're gonna see everything, and you're just gonna go, wow.
Well, I did go into one just to look, because
Mhm.
for me, growing up in the 90s, the idea that you can go into a shop and buy that
Right,
was pretty, really, like you can.
They got sodas, they got juice, they got this, they
Yeah.
got candy, they got this, they got that.
Yeah, and from what I've heard, they don't regulate it, right? It just kind of.
Well, and
So
again, we're talking about how the state legalized marijuana and didn't quite think of everything, and they're starting to catch up with that.
So
But there's now there can only be X amount of THC per
yeah.
dose and things like that.
Yeah,
Where in the beginning, you're right,
they could
they
just eat
they
something
just
and.
there could be 40 doses in there. Now there's, I believe it's 12. I'm not positive on
10
that.
mils.
But there's a whole bunch of different regulations that they've put in the last couple of years.
So is there any way, because there's no smell with that, right?
Right.
Do the eyes even get watery? Is there any way to tell if it's?
Well, the eyes will get watery, but there's Visine out there and there's things like that. So it's what I would say is look for strange things. You know your children.
Okay.
Look for them acting strangely. And then you gotta have that conversation. Why are you acting this way? I've never seen you do this before. Why are you doing it today? Did something happen? Have you tried something new? And that's where you gotta open up that line of conversation with the kids. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just had a question. Marijuana is, like, the topic is marijuana, but I haven't been to a pot shop, but my understanding is there are products that have no THC in it, there are products that have more THC than what you used to have as a joint earlier, and there are other products that have a tiny bit of THC, and where is this THC? the difference between like a CBD oil that has no THC to help against a medical seizure versus,
And I'm not a scientist, so I can't give you that answer 100%, but it's tetrahydroglycerin, and I can't even say it. But
It's, you're gonna go over a little bit of that, aren't you?
I put you on the spot. So basically, there are just two different components in the marijuana. So the
can you
THC,
come out in front a little bit and try
the
to?
THC is the psychoactive drug, or it makes you get high. The CBDs are a different component, so it helps with pain, but it doesn't get you high. Whereas, and then there's indicas and sativas, and those are different strains of marijuana. So an indica is something that makes you calm, and a sativa would, someone would act really hyper. So they're just different components of the drug.
So Pete Tram back here is a owner of one of our local dispensaries.
Oh, cool.
Pete he's an expert in the field, very knowledgeable, always has been willing to help educate me. And I would think that you would do the same with any parent.
Oh, absolutely.
So that if you have these questions, because to go into this, we could talk about this for 10 hours.
Right.
Yeah, easy.
So I just wanted to introduce Pete, and he's a resource for you.
No,
Definitely ask him
absolutely.
the
And-
Great, because I've never met you.
Right.
You know, I've met Jordan up in Aspen and stuff, and
I know
mean,
Jordan.
he's great about, I have some parents that have questions, I'll bring them up there and he'll introduce them, and I would love for you to, you know, volunteer to do that for, you know, the parents down here, because honestly, I think you can educate them better than I can, because you're dealing with it every single day.
No, I can, and I just, not to, you know, belittle your amount of knowledge about it, but
Well,
I've
I
been doing this for a
guarantee
long
yours is
time.
much higher. You know,
And
I'll bow to that right now.
Yeah, and, you know, the thing is, and I don't wanna step on anybody's parade or anything, but at the end of the day, I really believe this, that it's the families, it's the family unit that makes, you know, these things either happen or not happen with kids. And if the family unit is talking about this openly and has open discussions with their kids, I've got an 11-year-old, and we're talking about it right now. And I've told her, basically, there will be dire consequences if she does anything with cannabis before she's 25 years old. And that's our take on it. And
Well, and I think that's almost, from what I understand from Joe DeSalvo, and I talk about it quite a bit, that's kind of the whole Valley Marijuana Council is, it kind of starts at home. And that's why everybody here is trying to get parents to start that conversation with their children. And I think you're right, I think you hit it right on the head when you said it starts at home. And that's where, you know, we really need to look to people to step up and talk to their kids. And for you to volunteer to help everybody in this room with all the knowledge that you have about the marijuana, I think that's great, so I thank you for doing that.
No, and I think that you have to have those candid conversations, because like you said, there's so much information on the internet and social media that kids get, and I think a lot of those conversations, and they're skewed, and they're skewed in very, you know, for whatever reasons, and for whatever the motivations of those people that are having those conversations, they're not honest conversations typically. You know, oh, everybody should smoke weed. No, not everybody should. You know, kids shouldn't until they're at least 25 years old. You know, because a developing brain, you know, really doesn't stop developing until it's 25.
Yeah, you're right.
So, and we talked about this, and you and I talked about this. I mean, we as a group seriously thought about not being able, or not dispensing to kids under 25 years old, and tried to push that, at least in this valley and Eagle Valley.
Well, and I think this valley's taken big steps with looking at what they're doing with tobacco products and with vapes and stuff, and not selling them until they're 21.
Right.
That's a big step. You know, they're losing income, they're losing taxes, but they're still saying, we're concerned about the kids. And to me, that's a big thing.
Yep, no, I agree.
So we did tell folks this would wrap up by 7:30 or so. We can go a little over that, and might be offended if people have to peel off at 7:30. Maybe in the interest of time, I think we should move forward. And we want to get to some of this information about health effects and the conversation.
So, maybe. Hey Pete, you wanna come up and do this? I guarantee you're gonna know more than I am. I mean, we're talking about these things, and these are products that you sell.
Yeah.
Maybe come up and help me a little bit. Do you mind?
Paul? I know, I'm sure you are the expert in the room. I think we're gonna
That's fine.
just,
But
really more for time.
Yeah,
You know,
sure.
because we can kind of pace it and roll through it as needed. No offense to you.
No,
I know
not at all, because I'd spend
You got lots of
an
information.
hour on, dissecting each one of these for
Yeah.
everybody.
Go through this? Okay. Yeah, so that first picture, I think the idea with that is that that's probably the form of marijuana that is most familiar to people in the room here, that are adults, is, that the joint, right? And so, I think that what we're really trying to introduce tonight is just that there's just lots of different forms now, and you can see it in a lot of different modes. So I don't see a whole lot of joints out there anymore, especially with the youth. It's just not as fashionable. It's not as trendy. But that's basically the raw bud that's wrapped up in a piece of paper and then smoked. If you go into some dispensaries or some shops, retail shops, you're going to see all sorts of delivery methods. The bong there on the left, pipes, and then what you're seeing there is just bud from the flowering plant of cannabis. They dry it out. This is a little bit, somewhat new on the scene, vaporizing marijuana. So, basically vaporizing is just heating, using one of these products or one of these pipes or rigs to basically heat the oil or the actual raw marijuana to a certain point where it's not burning, but it's releasing a vapor that's inhaled. So you're getting the THC from that, or the CBD. And one of the things, there's a lot of unknowns about vaping as far as the risks. I think it's generally perceived as safer, and the science is just not caught up to that. There's not a lot known about the effects, the harmful effects of vaping. You're inhaling vapor into your lungs, so there's some concern about some of the possibilities there. There are a lot of components to the aerosol that is being inhaled, and then there's some of those substances are known to be harmful. Again, there's not a lot of definitive about that.
Can I ask a question real quick? On the vaping presentation, I feel like I walked away a little confused about that it doesn't smell, or it smells
Right.
like a flavor. Is that with the marijuana as well?
It could be, yeah. It doesn't smell.
Does it smell like anything?
It doesn't smell like marijuana. So if you have a nose for marijuana, you kind of, I know what that smells like. That you're not going to get that from a vape pen.
But it doesn't mean it's gonna smell like one of the flavors.
It might smell like nothing, or it might smell like cherry vanilla, or there's lots of different flavors. Lots of different scents.
So will kids use the oils to hide the marijuana? Like to put oil in the marijuana in a vape pen? I don't understand.
Yeah, well, it's a little easier to hide that because it doesn't smell, and
I mean, are they adding the
adolescents are tricky,
oils to
so.
the marijuana, or are they adding the oils to other stuff?
Well, you can take a tincture that's made from marijuana, from cannabis, and put that into a Gatorade or a drink. So And then, of course, you know, the product that's used for edibles is, you know, basically, it's basically a concentrate, or not necessarily a concentrate, but an oil from the plant.
And there are vape juices that contain THC already. So there's a juice, the flavored juice, and then they have the THC. So I think that's what your question was, if the juice or the vape pen can have THC.
This is kind of the other big category of the way that marijuana is consumed now. These are all, or this is about the concentrates that are made from marijuana. Basically, you know, a lot of times kids will refer to it as wax, dabs, shatter in the middle there. I believe that's shatter, which is more like not really peanut brittle. It's kind of like looks like, you know, something that kind of melted and then hardened. And that's going to be some of the highest concentration THC that you're going to see. You know, the process, again, you know, I'm not super knowledgeable about this, but you know, basically, the THC is extracted from the raw marijuana, and they use kind of they use butane basically to extract that from there, and then the butane is mostly burned off. There's probably some butane, or there could be some butane left in the actual concentrate. And then there's special rigs that are designed for, you know, kind of optimizing the experience of smoking that, or vaporizing that.
So with that shattered stuff, they like break off a piece and suck on it, or?
Yeah, well, they would heat it up. So they'd break up a really little piece, because it's concentrate, you know, it could be as high as like 90%, 80% THC. It's just a little, they take just a little tiny little piece and they put it into yeah, you know, and basically heat it up until it reaches that combustion point where it vaporizes, and then you can inhale that. And I know this is kind of like the super stripped down version of how that works, but you know, they really are informative in these dispensaries. I went up to one in Aspen, and they really took us through exactly how it works, and you know, they showed us all the different things that are used to use the different types of drugs and the different types of products. Edibles. I think the big takeaway talking about edibles is just that there's actually been a fair bit of regulation around edibles. They realized at some point that there needed to be some kind of warning that it was that it contained THC, and it needed not just to be on the package, but on the actual piece of chocolate or gummy or cookie or whatever the food was that the THC was in. So you're going to see that stamped. You know, I don't know if you can kind of make that stamp out on the left here. It has the THC symbol on there, stamped into the actual food. You know, and that's an effort to, you know, keep it out of the hands of kids. I think the big thing with edibles is just that, you know, if you go into a shop and you buy edibles, they're going to give you lots of good information about, hey, you know, this is not going to kick in until a little while, so don't overdo it. You know, start small, just, you know, use a little bit. They're going to give you all that information. But if you're 15 and you go to a party and someone, hey, I got some cookies, you know, they're weed cookies, you're not going to get that education, right? You're not going to get that information. So there's this real risk, excuse me, a risk of overdoing it on edibles because you don't feel the effect as quickly as when you smoke it. So, you know, you kind of see the picture of a kid eating a cookie and then, I'm not feeling anything. You know, well, I'll have another one. you know, and then before they know it, they've consumed, you know, 20, 30 milligrams of THC, and they could become pretty intoxicated. And that's the universal symbol for THC. You can see that on these containers, packaging for edibles, and yeah, anything with THC in it.
Is there some sort of chart or something that shows the effects of THC on the adolescent developing brain?
We do talk a little bit about that, and we're probably going to give you the shorthand answer. You know, what I tell the kids here, you know, when we talk about marijuana, the main thing is just that because their brain is developing, they are more at risk for addiction, even to something like marijuana, which is generally perceived as being less addictive, but because they're just way more likely to overdo do things, and they get so much more pleasure from pretty much anything, you know, which is, you know, really, it's a gift of adolescence, you know, that you get a thrill out of skiing and mountain biking and being with friends and your first girlfriend or your first kiss, and that's wonderful, right? But then the same applies to you smoke weed, and it's just a little too good to be true. The other thing that has been proven or shown is it affects short-term memory. It's not much on long-term memory. It's really that short-term memory. But that, because they're in school and because they're learning so much, because they're in all these relationships, and those relationship skills are coming online, that's a really important thing to keep intact. The other big concern is the ability to regulate their own emotions. So all this stuff is happening naturally in their brains just because they're going through life. So you add this psychoactive substance that kind of does it for them, and then they're more likely to not develop those neural pathways that would develop those skills and traits as they age. So that's kind of the, a doctor could come in here and talk to you about, exactly what's, a lot of times kids will say, well, does it kill brain cells? And I like to be really factual and with kids, and I'm like, it doesn't kill brain cells per se. It's that you don't develop the connections in your brain that you would normally if you were not using it. If you're doing all these tasks and learning that you would be doing if you weren't.
Check out.
Yeah.
Get habitual.
Is that?
Yeah, that's
answer?
good.
Okay. Hi everybody, I'm coordination specialist for the Aspen schools, so I'm just supporting Paul a little bit tonight. This doesn't go into too much of the actual health effects because we know that there are, but really just what we can do about them for our kids, how we can keep our kids a little bit safer. Okay, so yeah, you can keep going. I think this is just a cool statistic because just like in the beginning when we were talking about our perception is that more kids are using marijuana than they actually are, or kids' perception is that their peers are using it more than they actually are. So in this survey done, there was less than 1 in 10 parents that keep marijuana in or around their home when they had kids ages 1 to 14. So that's a pretty low amount. So I think for kids that are really young, we need to teach them, well, one, we need to keep marijuana out of the reach of kids, so that's why these black bags are really cool. just like we would with our liquor cabinet or anything else that is not safe. With your kids that are really young, have conversations with them if they're at their friend's house about, I don't know if they'd be old enough to know the THC symbol yet, but when they're older, they would. But just ask them, or tell them to ask people before they eat or drink at their friends' houses, before they put something in their mouth, because they just never know. And role play that with them, how to ask what to eat or drink in someone's house. That's a really good skill for them to know. And with the lock bags and just these containers, make sure that your marijuana is just kept in those for the younger kids, because statistics say that up to 70% of unintentional indigestion is prevented by those containers. Okay, go ahead. So brain development is not complete until age 25, and that's really in our prefrontal cortex, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But just for their best chance to reach their full potential, they shouldn't use marijuana, because this part of our brain, which is responsible for decision making, our ability to regulate our emotions, just to be kind of regulated, responsible individuals, is not developed until age 25. And we know that marijuana really affects that part of our brain most. So an adolescent brain is like a race car with bicycle brakes. So your dopamine system, or your reward system, is the most active during adolescence. And the amygdala, that's a part of our brain, is very emotional and reactive, and that is completely developed in adolescence. But then, like I say, our prefrontal cortex, which develops way later, that is responsible for reasoning and being thoughtful, is not there, and the logic isn't there. So we have this really intense amygdala and no prefrontal cortex, and this is why adolescents are at such great risk for substance abuse, and not just substance abuse, but risky behaviors in general. So we know for sure that kids that use marijuana, they have a harder time learning, they have problems remembering, and it's been proven that they're having lower math scores and lower reading scores as well. I know there's a lot of arguments out there about whether marijuana is addictive. The research is leaning towards that, yes, it does have addictive properties, and it's way harder to stop using marijuana later in your life if you start at a young age. Yeah, I mean, I think going back to what I said about like our reward system in our brain being so heightened during this age, if a kid does something risky and they get a positive, in their mind it's a positive consequence, they're probably going to do it again. So yes. Alright, so yes, keep safe storage, definitely. And encourage your neighbors to do so, and check with your kid's parent or kid's friend's parents about that. Since marijuana is just everywhere now, make sure that their stuff's locked up and your kids are at anyone's house. Don't use in front of them, that's a great tip. Just being a role model. I think someone in the back said that it really just starts in the family unit, and I completely agree with that. If you are talking to your kids about consequences before they happen, that's a really good idea. And just not using the drug in front of them.
I would like to add to that, I think that's a good step in the right direction,
Yeah.
but kids will know when people are high.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can hide it a little bit, but still when you're around them, it is gonna show up and they're, as you know, very perceptive.
Yeah, and maybe that should say just not, don't be high around your kids. That's a really good point. Don't just not use in front of your kids, just don't be high around them. Yeah. So talk to your kids about healthy choices. talk to them about the consequences of using, really encourage them to have short and long-term goals, and really help them focus on those. And talk to them about how marijuana can get in the way of those. We know that it affects their school performance, we know that it affects their brain. You can talk to them about the health risks. Saying no, I think, is a very, I don't know, it's a hard thing because kids are like, oh, that doesn't work. But there are a lot of ways to say no, especially teaching kids that when they're in like middle and elementary school is a really great thing to do, and role playing that with them. So not just a no, but maybe teaching them to come up with an excuse and give them an excuse before they even are in a situation. There's a big thing going around right now, it's called Project X. And so this is a good one for your high school kids. If you guys talk to them about if they're ever in an uncomfortable situation, whether it be around drugs or anything else, tell them to text you the letter X, and then you'll know that that's your cue to call them immediately, and you can be their excuse. So maybe you say, oh, your sister's sick, I'm coming to get you, or whatever, but that might be a really good communication idea, so you can help your kids get out of situations and they know that they can text you X at any time and that you will be their saving grace, which is sometimes what kids need. Wait, what was the last one there? Okay. Okay. Oh, and just telling them again that not everyone's doing this. I think that's really important for us to all go home and tell the kids, and me tell the kids at school, that this is not a normal thing. Because they look to their peers for what's normal. And their idea of that is very, very skewed.
Okay. All right. Let me do just a real quick check-in about time. I'm going to respect people's time, and we can certainly go a little longer. Let's see. Raise your hand if you need to leave at 7:30. And is about ways to think about starting that conversation with your kid. So basically, we're kind of defining a trusted adult as an askable adult. Someone that is a guardian or a caregiver or a professional or a teacher that's approachable and open to answering questions. So this is somebody that an adolescent could go to and kind of reasonably trust that you're giving them accurate information that you care about. I like this bit. The basic thing is just like, yourself, your own values. You come to those conversations with a sense of, really knowing where you stand on things. Probably it's more impactful than the actual thing that you're saying, but just really having that grounded adult presence is probably the most helpful thing. These are some tips about how to kind of hook the kid that you're talking to into the conversations. It's way harder to talk to. I have a 12-year-old son, and you think like I'm a counselor, it's like I think I can talk to my own kid about stuff, but it is really hard to kind of like keep him with me and keep him engaged in the conversation. It's really difficult. I like the first thing is to really try to validate their feelings. So this is a way to just instantly kind of show that you're listening to them, you're hearing what their experience is. Avoid judgment. So it's fine to, you can say, I don't want you trying weed, I don't want you drinking. If they come home and they confess that they try to drink they had a beer or something, it's fine to say, to judge that behavior. But I think judgment here is we're talking about judging their character, judging their person as somehow failing or either not being good or, being a disappointment, those types of statements we want to try to avoid. Asking lots of questions of them, really trying to kind of get down to what are they actually saying, what's their concern, what is their reasoning that they're trying to explain to you. Focusing on their strengths, their positive traits, their goals. This is a big one, knowing when to walk away from the conversation and reschedule. I would just say if emotions are high and this power struggle ensuing, that's just, it's like, I'm just, I don't want to talk to you when we're both really frustrated and angry. So I'm going to take a rain check and let's come back to this when we're calm. Helping them when they, when they're in a good headspace, helping them with skills that just generally help them with stress. So it's not necessarily just about trying to get them to avoid taking that first drink or that trying weed, but thinking more bigger picture about, the ultimate goal is so that they can handle life. You want them to, they're going to do all sorts of stuff, as they go through adolescence and go into their adulthood. But you want them to be able to handle life and be happy and healthy. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable. A lot of times I'll say to my son, this is kind of an awkward conversation, or, I'm a little nervous about talking to you about this, or I kind of feel weird talking to you about this. I just go ahead and get it out there that this is tough. It's tough to talk about this stuff. And we kind of laugh, and then that kind of greases the wheels a little bit. Again, if you're right in the middle of a power struggle or you're laying down consequences, that's a different conversation. I think the conversation we're talking about is more where you're in a good space, people, you're both calm, and there's an opportunity to talk about marijuana. Asking permission goes a long way with an adolescent. Hey, is it all right with you if we talked a little bit about marijuana? Because I know there's been a lot going on at school around that. Is this a good time? Hey, what would you think about us, going out for a coffee or something and just talking about this a little bit? Break it down into simple little bits. You want to stay out of that kind of lecture mode where you're delivering the treatise on all things virtuous and good in your world, right? It's more like business-like, just kind of basic information. It all comes from a place of concern for your kid, and you want to let them know that. We're talking about this because I'm worried about you. We're talking about this because I want the best for you, but I'm concerned because people at your age sometimes make mistakes that they can't take back. And we all know that when you can give a kid a few choices to choose from, that is empowering, right? It kind of gives them some power, because when you're having this conversation, they're already in kind of a one-down position, so you can kind of bring yourself down a little bit by saying, hey, what do you think about this? You can either do this, you can do this, or you can do this. Because a lot of times their logic will run kind of like, if I can't try weed, then I'm not going to have any friends. Right? It's this black and white kind of reasoning. Well, let's look at that. It sounds like you're going back to that, validating your feeling. It sounds like you're really worried about losing friends because that's what everyone is doing. Right? So you kind of circle back to that, and then you come back to that point of, let's think of some options that you have for keeping your friends and not trying weed. So You know, one option is some kids try this, some kids try this. Do any of those sound good to you? This comes out of some counseling literature on motivational interviewing. Just kind of general principles for having tough conversations, trying to ask open-ended questions, so avoiding those yes/no answers or the you know, kind of that question-answer trap that you can fall into with kids a lot of times. You can ask those. But tell me a little bit about this, or you know, give me an example of, you know, what is it like for you when you go to a party and you see this stuff happening? What's that like? That's an open-ended question. Affirmation, you know, just giving them props for, you know, man, it sounds like you were in a tough situation and you said no and you walked away from it. Nice work. You really focused on your goals. I love that. And then reflections is just, again, validating those feelings and kind of reflecting back what they have said to you so that you can show that you're really hearing them and you're listening. Sometimes, as a parent, I just so much want to deliver the message. You know, it's just like, I just want them to know the truth, you know? And so I kind of have to step back from that and kind of, first I need to hear where he's coming from or where she's coming from, and kind of get that. Let's get to that. Okay. So, you know, hopefully these are conversations that you're having, not just when there's trouble, you know, but kind of like whenever there's an opportunity. You know, like I had the paper open the other day, and my son walked by, and he was like, "Whoa, look at that pot leaf," you know, and you know, there's this ad for a dispensary or something, and I'm like, "Oh yeah," you know, and we just had the shortest conversation about it, but oh yeah, you know, I'm going to do this presentation. Have you heard anything more about, you know, have friends been talking about weed, and then that was kind of it, you know, we didn't stretch it out. You know, the studies have shown, I mean, there's lots of research about, hey, you know, youth say that it does matter what their parents think, what they say, that has an impact on their decisions. And oh yeah, there's kind of this thing about, you know, one of the reasons that I think youth hesitate to talk to their parents is because they think that they're gonna be that their parents are gonna think that they have tried marijuana. So that's why it's kind of up to us to start those conversations, because you can kind of see how that seems like kind of a setup to, you know, to you if you're 15. You guys up for a little role play? Maybe just to kind of wrap us up and just do the looking of our last thing. Oh, I know everyone's excited about this. Tell by your body language. Okay. You know, one way I could give you a little out on this. I know some people really like role play, some people don't. What you could do is you could maybe you two, you know, you could join these two at this table. You guys are a nice big group over here. Maybe you could go back to that table over there, and maybe just a pair at each table could do a role play, and the others could watch. So that way the extroverted people can do the role play, and the other two can just watch. Okay, and there's some benefit to that. And this is what I'd like to suggest is that you just kind of go through the motions of trying to use the words that you would use in a conversation with a kid. So one person can play the adolescent, one person can play the adult, the askable adult. Okay, and what I would encourage you to do is to shoot for those oars, you know, the open-ended questions, the reflections, the affirmations, and to see if you can really avoid the lecture, but more focus on what the kid is saying and kind of where they're coming from. So here's the situation, the scenario. If you're up for the challenge, you're driving in the car with your high school aged child. You pass a billboard for a marijuana dispensary. Your child says, "Hey, since marijuana is legal now, that means it's safe, and you don't care if I use it, right?" So how do you respond? So this is kind of one of those spontaneous opportunities to have a conversation. Would you all be willing to? You could just find one pair at your table to do the thing, and then the others could watch. Would you all mind joining these two over here? And Nick, if you want to pick your table here. Just put up some.
I was not someone that usually took this thing.
I was hoping just to put up some resources on the screen here, and lots of good information out there. Good to Know is a really great resource. Speak Now is a really great resource. Good to Know has a really diverse package of information. It's not all doom and gloom and how bad marijuana is. You know, if you want a real balanced, just like information about, you know, because it has lots of things in there about, like, okay, if you're visiting Colorado and you want, you know, and you're an adult, you're over 21, you want to experience marijuana. Here are some basic things you really need to know, and it talks about edibles and just all this stuff, you know. So it's just good general information. And then there's lots of stuff in there about youth. And then Speak Now, of course, is more about the conversation and how to get that going.
There's, I don't know if you guys saw when you came in, but there's handouts on the first table over there. And there's no resources there.
And then if you guys could, before you leave, please fill out our little evaluation. It's pretty short. It's two-sided, but it's pretty short. And if we could collect those, that'd be great. And thank you, everybody, for coming out. Appreciate it. Paul, thank you. Oh, and grab some pizza on the way out.
Absolutely, especially